Last but not least, we have another speaker, Dr. Raymond Yao. Raymond is the general manager of the Technical Services and Sustainable Development at the Swire property, and Raymond is also also supporting a lot of the association in Hong Kong in provide a lot of advice in the environmental and sustainable issue. As a general manager since 2016, he needs a few important initiatives, including the formulation of the Sustainable Development 2030 strategy, digital innovation of the energy management platform, climate risk assessment, 1.5 degrees C aligned science-based target, and setting for 2050, 2025, and also 2030. And also the implementation strategy of the carbon emission and energy reduction pathway to the net zero by 2050. And also a lot of the ESG green finance framework. And Raymond also working as a representative to support Tsinghua University to conduct research in the Hong Kong and also China, and also in China. And Raymond is here. Welcome, Raymond. Hello, Raymond?
Felix.
Yeah, I can hear you and see you. I pass the mic to you.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
So I take over the screen, right?
Yes, please.
So you can see my screen?
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you, Green Council, inviting me and Swire Properties to share on this particular topic, achieving an ambitious emissions target, advancing to achieve, right? And today's focus, I'm going to share with you our sustainability journey, and in particular, our net zero journey through leadership based on scientific evidence and methods, education and engagement, which indeed are really important for real estate developers. Let me just have a brief introduction of the company. Swire Properties was set up or established in the year 1972, and we are headquarters in Hong Kong. And we are indeed a leading developers, owners and operator of office, retail, hotel, and residential, with a particular focus on mixed-use development, and such as Taikoo Place or Pacific Place in Hong Kong, and Taikoo Li Sanlitun, etc. in Chinese mainland. And at present, or day back in mid of last year, we are totally having roughly about 28 million square feet of GFA of investments portfolios across in this part of the region. And we place heavy emphasis on sustainable development, and our efforts have indeed been recognized by the industry, including achieving AAA rating on the Hang Seng Corporate Sustainability Indices, the top company since 2018, and the GREB's Global Sector Leader on Mixed-Use Development since 2017, and being ranked top 5% globally on the Dow Jones Sustainability World Index. On the technical team or technical side, we also been recognized in implementing our sustainability vision. And these efforts in managing our properties are being recognized by ASHRAE as well as the SIPSI, receiving some worldwide recognition in this type of achievement. We have a sustainability vision, and in 2016, we basically rekindled our SD vision and associate sort of action plan. And we set out to have the vision to be a leading SD performers in our real estate industry globally by 2030. In doing so, we come with a whole series of strategy. And this strategy, we call it SD 2030 strategy, built upon 5 pillars: people's, partners, places, environmental performance, and economic performance, which formulate under the transformative creative transformation of SD 2030 of Swire Properties. And in recent years, one of our biggest commitments was to establish the science-based carbon target in alignment with the Paris Agreement and also the climate science. And in 2019, a few years ago, the company had our SBT 2-degree aligned pathway approved by the SBTi. And in 2020, we committed to the business ambition for 1.5 degree. And in September last year, 2021, we had our 1.5 degree aligned science-based target, providing our near-term target, which paved way to the net zero future approved by the SBTi. And what does it mean? For this 1.5 aligned SBT, for our scope 1 and 2 GHG emission, we target to have a 25% and 46% GHG absolute GHG emission reduction by the year 2025 and 2030, respectively, versus the base year of 2019. And majority of the carbon emission comes from our own electricity consumption in managing the investment portfolios across. And thus, to achieve this target, we need to aggressively reduce our electricity consumption. And indeed, for our science-based target, we also set targets for scope 3, which in our case, the two scope 3 emission, which are most material as far as our scope 3 carbon footprints are concerned. One is the downstream lease asset, which indeed are our tenant energy consumption. And the other aspect is the capital goods, which apparently quite similar to Gammon or earlier Emma's presentation, is our new development. They embody carbon embedded in creating the new developments of our investment portfolios. So we also set targets for these two major upfront carbon emission, as well as the tenant electricity consumption and corresponding carbon emission. And as a result, we are the first real estate developers in Hong Kong and Chinese mainland to have an approved 1.5 degree aligned SBT, indeed paving way to a net zero future by the year 2050. So other than SBT, we also look upon how we manage our whole life cycle carbon emission, but it is an initial attempt. So at the moment, we focus on the upfront carbon, very similar to what earlier speakers talked about. So those embedded carbons or that's embedded in the construction of the buildings, in the raw materials, and how we put those materials together in creating the final buildings, right? So these term as the upfront carbon in this British standard. So in our whole life cycle consideration, due to the scarcity of data and little information available, we were only able to concentrate at present on this upfront carbon aspect. However, on the operational carbon, B6 in this BS standard, operational energy use certainly will take full account, which I will be trying to explain to you a bit later on. But in other steps along this whole life cycle emission of buildings, we are in the process of learning from many processes of this and trying to educate ourselves in order to ascertain the full implication as quickly as possible. But like what I just said, at the moment you focus on B6, operational carbon, as well as B7, the operational water use, and A1 to A5 associated with the upfront and embodied carbon. So we indeed took a look on what's about the relationship between the upfront and embodied carbon versus the our defined whole life cycle emission. In our case, the whole life cycle considers scope 1 and 2 operational carbon emission directly controlled by landlord, as well as scope 3 downstream carbon emission from our tenants' operation over, say, for example, a 50-year life operation of a typical grade A good office building, for instance, in this case. So we find roughly the upfront carbon constitute roughly about 15% of the carbon emission, and about 40% relating to operational carbon emission that can directly be controlled by the landlord. And the rest of the 44% roughly to be emitted by in form of the tenant's operation. Indirectly, the landlord might have some degree of persuasion to reduce it, but by and large, they are dictated by the tenant's operation or their attitude of seeing how much they wish to reduce it. But when it comes down to our vision, we like to engage the tenants in reducing their operational electricity consumption in order to make the whole pie shrinking, meaning reducing the whole life cycle emission of a typical building for its life cycle. But when we look at the embodied carbon in itself, upfront carbon in this case, our study on one of our newly developed building, Untitled Place, 90% of the embodied carbon came from the major construction materials. The rest are being consumed by transportation and construction of the materials itself, and also other ways. But majority are being emitted in form of embodied carbon of the major construction materials. This slide shows our scope 1 and 2 emission pathway. And the chart on the left shows over the past 13 years or 12 years since 2008 up until 2020, our energy reduction trend. And as can be seen, the y-axis basically represent the energy consumption or the electricity use intensity, EUI, versus the years. So we see a continuous descending trend in terms of the electricity consumption or EUI over the past 12 years. So it's a very meaningful way. However, since we committed to the science-based target, we need to use a slightly different way to represent it. So we started to use the base year 2019 as the base year on the right side chart, and extending it to 2030, which is the year of our commitment at the year 2030. So in order to achieve our set our SBT 1.5 degree target, we need to follow as much as we could the dotted line trajectory, meaning we need to continuously to reduce the energy consumption as much as we could. So about 2 years on, 2022 now, so at the end of the 2021, we managed to reduce roughly about 23% of absolute carbon emission reduction. So if you remember, our 2025 target is 25%. So roughly at the end of the 2021, we achieved roughly about 23. But I have to admit that we use various strategy in achieving it. So we might not be able to repeat the same value the year after. So we need to continue to look for other alternative and innovations and continuously to engage our portfolios to reduce energy consumption in order to ensure we would be able to achieve our upcoming target, say, for example, by the year of 2025. But we're hopeful as far as we're concerned. So this slide shows the kinds of methods that has been practicing at Swire Properties in reducing energy consumption. So in particular, in managing all this existing asset, we look for more efficient equipment where we can upgrade our existing equipment. For instance, some of our stocks has been around for quite some years, and it was time to replace some obsolete equipment. So every reason that we should get a capex to replace the older, less efficient equipment. For example, chillers, particularly for some of the existing buildings, the condition of the chillers will come to a stage that it's worthwhile for replacing it. And the payback period wouldn't be that unattractive. And meaning that there's a lot of good reason to spend the capex to reduce the energy consumption in years to come. So majority of our chillers in our existing buildings in Hong Kong, particularly for those buildings has been around for more than a decade or so, have their chillers replaced. And immediately we can appreciate the energy saving. Also, we have used a new technology called EC motor plug fans to replace the centrifugal fans in majority of our air handling units. Immediately, that can save at least about 30% of the fan energy of each of the units. And if your AHU or buildings systems has a much worse sort of less efficient operation in terms of fan, then you can easily achieve over 40% of saving simply by replacing the fan on the fan energy. So these are all measures that result from our experience in the past 2 or 3 years. Right, we also embark on retrocommissioning commissioning process to majority of our existing buildings. We even went further to install energy meters and sensors to upgrade the retrocommissioning commissioning process to an ongoing real-time monitoring-based commissioning. In other words, I don't need to continue to rely on human resources or limited technology to oversee the retrocommissioning commissioning process, but instead I use the monitoring-based measure equipment to help me in doing so. We're also digitizing our technical services by implementing the cloud-based smart energy management platform in recent years. And so we were able to understand the performance and engage energy saving measures much more rapidly. And we do have a lot of assets in Chinese mainland. So we also look for innovation to upgrade our asset, reduce the energy consumption. And we came with some innovations, such as in Chinese, we call it 光储直流, meaning using photovoltaic energy storage, direct current, and flexible power consumption in managing the building. So we now pilot in one of our assets in Sanlitun in Beijing since 2 years ago by engaging this process. And this pilot will be implemented this year. But a few months ago, in 2021, this particular strategy has been mentioned in the action plan for carbon dioxide peaking by the State Council of the PRC. So incidentally, this approach has become one of the most promising approach in delivering near zero carbon emissions in Chinese building sector. We also invest on renewables, as can be seen both in Hong Kong and Chinese mainland. We install on-site renewable energy generation, as well as off-site in some of the locations in Chinese mainland. For instance, 2 years ago in Chengdu, we started to procure green energy, 100% RE for 2 years for Chengdu. And also last year for our Guangzhou Taikoo Kui project, we also managed to procure off-site 100% RE electricity. So helping to achieve the 28% of our Chinese mainland landlocked electricity through the RE, reducing a substantial carbon emissions per year in Chinese mainland. And for our new projects, for example, in Untitled Place, which has a lot of very interesting features, which I don't have time to go through one by one, but these features help to achieve over 30% of saving compared to some standard, for example, BEC Code 2012, and also with ASHRAE standard, roughly about 28%. And also the operation seems to justify the design assumption as well. And the embodied carbon, Emma talked about it in substantially earlier. But for Untitled Place, we also undertook a embodied carbon calculation, upfront embodied carbon. And we find the carbon emission factor per GFA construction floor area roughly have this value, 575 kilogram carbon dioxide emission per square meter construction floor area. So this immediately form the yardstick for Swire Prop ourselves to gauge, to compare to our future buildings to be constructed in Hong Kong. Because in Untitled Place, we have already procured a lot of low carbon construction materials, both in concrete or rebar, some of the low carbon elements also highlighted by Emma in her presentation earlier. For example, we used flying ash as the cement substitute to reduce the carbon content of the concrete. And we are adopting up to 100% recycled steel in the rebar and also the structural steel outrigger form. So we also undertook very good structural optimization during the design process and so on, in order to help us to reduce the embodied carbon of Untitled Place. And engaging the tenants, like what I said earlier, almost 40% of the whole life cycle of a typical office building are energy spent by our tenants. So we got to engage our tenants in an educated way. So we roll out a whole series of programs. For example, the Green Performance Pledge in office, encouraging commitment of our tenants to reduce their own electricity consumption. And we have some kinds of mutual benefit as a result. For example, we offer free energy audit to some of our tenants who are interested in doing it. And also by return, they commit themselves providing some data and also commitment on reducing during the fit out or renovations or daily operation and so on. We have quite a lot of office tenants agreeing to this program. And so we set out our own targets. By the year 2025, 50% of our office tenants in wholly owned portfolios sign on to this Green Performance Pledge to jointly improve their environmental performances. With Green Kitchen initiative, particularly for those energy-intensive F&B tenants, to have the low energy operation recognized by our Green Kitchen Award initiatives. And also we install with the power metering system in some of our tenants, trying to measure up how much energy is being spent on what kind of circuit, what kind of usages, in order to have a better understanding. So together, we can reduce energy consumption, meaning that my Scope 3 as a developer could have an opportunity to reduce it in a substantial way. And same apply to the Scope 1 and 2 direct energy consumption reduction by our tenants. And we engage in various kinds of smart waste reduction program as well. So also Phil Slide talk about our climate adaptation and resilience strategy. So we undertook physical risk assessment for our global hazard under various physical risks ICPP scenario setting, RCP 8.5 down to RCP 2.6 to ascertain the risk, the climate risk to our asset, trying to assign to low to moderate risk and for short and medium term measure for individual assets to mitigate the social risk as a result, to make the stock more resilient. We're also in the process of better understanding all those transition risks preventing us in the lower carbon economy. So we're trying to identify those risks and respond to it to reduce or enhance the resiliency as much as we could. So just to cite one example, for example, in Miami, we also have a mixed development there. Miami is often subjected to hurricanes, similar to Hong Kong to an extent, but Miami is much more vulnerable from that perspective. So we need to measure how the asset there is going to increase its resiliency to those climate threats. And we also propose some clever system to the local council. For example, in this case, a prominent system designed in a natural-based solution to provide climate resilience for the coastal area in the Miami city, for the reason that our asset is quite near to the coastal line there in the business district. So together with the city officials and county officials' effort, we propose some measures and work closely together to mitigate the risk as much as we could and make the asset overall more resilient. So with all these mitigation measures and resilience measures need to be in place to make our asset more resilient and also decarbonize it, paving way achieving net zero future, we need some investment. So we invest on the possibility of getting green finance over the years. Since 2018, we have our first certified green bond, almost US 500 million in Hong Kong under the green bond framework. It's the first of those kinds in Hong Kong, enable us to use those sort of investment on green buildings, climate change adaptation, improving energy efficiency, and adoption of renewable energy. And so over the years, we have issued various sustainability-linked loans and bonds strongly associated with performance in decarbonization as well as the climate resiliency. So we set targets, but by the year of 2021 last year, over 30% of our current bond and loan facility come from green financing. And we also set targets to achieve it by the year 2025 and 2030 accordingly. And so and every year we issue our SD report for those who are interested in our last report and also upcoming report. By all means, log on to our website. You should be able to see much more details of our decarbonization journey as a developers and also our climate resiliency strategy. So finally, the way Swire decarbonize our asset is by setting a corporate target and those targets with real vision and also clear targets, both near term as well as a far term. We try to cover as comprehensive scope as possible, basically full scope 1 and 2, and the most material scope 3 as much as we could, despite the fact that we were only addressing the embodied carbon, upfront carbon, but we are in the process trying to learn other embodied carbon content as we could. So we managing individual asset portfolios, we adopt renewable energies, we manage our embodied carbon, but as well as engaging our scope 3 tenants carbon emission reduction in order to enable us to have a full picture. We address the climate resiliency. We use the green finance to help to fund the whole process along. So with that, we believe that we have a comprehensive strategy helping us in achieving our committed SBT, paving way to a net zero future by 2050. And that ends my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Raymond. We do hope more Hong Kong companies would follow Swire Property to set science target. And we also see a lot of question coming to you is about the target and how to set it, okay? Maybe you also look at the question. There is a first question is, you have a target talking about reduce 25% or 46%. Would it apply to all new and also old development, or only applying to the new development from the base year 2019?
It applied to all existing investment buildings, as well as upcoming committed new buildings at the time when we submit our targets in 2020. So in other words, it's basically our whole investment portfolios, but we were required to review our target every 5 years. So in other words, by in 5-year time, we will have to take on board other new projects that previously not in our committed list in the science-based target decarbonization requirement.
Another is a technical question is for the emission from the tenants. The audience would like to double confirm that Swire property only count energy. Is it? Is it science-based target accept it? And how Swire justify to the science-based target that other sources from the tenants are not counted?
I would answer it this way. All the tenants, our investment portfolios, investment means office and retail and hotel, right? And including both existing buildings tenants and new developments tenants, right? So their operational energy consumption will be considered as our scope 3, meaning that we need to, we also committed in reducing the scope 3 emission reduction on tenants' energy consumption. But those, as I already pointed out, those are only indirectly controlled by our landlord. In fact, it is not controlled by us, but therefore, we need to consider various kinds of measures in engaging the tenants willing to reduce their energy consumption with us together. So it is a very ambitious and tall order. So we are including basically all the power consumption of the tenants in those areas. That's why we instigate the green performance pledge in form of green pledge, not green lease as yet, and also the tenant power metering measurement, and to measure up their consumption, understanding how much they're consuming, and then work our way together with them to reduce energy consumption. For example, we succeed in installing the power metering in one of our tenants in Untitled place. And so by understanding the power consumption, we identify 46% of the power consumption are actually being used at nighttime, not daytime, although they might have a 24-hour operation. But those power might be consumed not deliberately, right? So they might have continued to switch on a lot of appliances and so on. And so by having this kinds of power metering, monitoring, we were able to identify together with tenants that there's a possibility to reduce those power wastage. But of course, the energy consumption of tenants, I'm only referring to those non-essential power, meaning if those are to deal with data center or their servers, no way we are going to reduce that consumption because that is their essential operation. So we are only counting on lighting power and small power. Those are non-essential power consumption of tenants. And with that, we identify in one of the examples recently, over 40% of those kinds of non-essential powers consumed by tenants are actually wasted during the nighttime. So the tenant immediately engage some kinds of measure to make sure they will switch off, for example, the printers and a lot of non-essential lighting much earlier on and so on, helping them to reduce their energy consumption. And with that, it's helping us to achieve part and partial our target on Scope 3.
Also help them to save. You also help them to save money, huh?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's very important. I think it's very important that to alert the tenants that there's a energy saving or money saving opportunity. Yeah. Okay, and we see that you have spend a lot of effort in reducing those kind of embodied carbon of the construction material, but we share some of the difficulty in the Hong Kong construction sector in applying those kind of low carbon materials such as green cement, green steel, and wooden construction.
Well, I think one of the major difficulties is the limited market availability of some of these low carbon materials in the local market. And in particular, over the past 3 or 4 years, with our complete construction of Untitled Place, at that time, there's basically only one contractor who were able to provide low carbon cement and steel to our project. Also at the time when CIC is creating the kinds of green certificate for carbon. But a few years move on, the market expanded a bit, but it's still not big enough for a developer's perspective to have a higher degree of competitive pricing, because we're still seeing a slight cost premium associated with low carbon sort of material procurement. I think Emma interestingly highlight one point. In years to come, the price could be going up rather than down. I suspect it's because of the scarcity of those sort of resources and more developers are demanding for this type of materials. So the price could go up instead of going down. So therefore, as a developer, my major difficulty is the market does not provide enough competition, particularly for the cost of those sort of construction, right? And I would be happy to see the market progressively transform in the next few years, but at the same time, the scarcity of those sort of resources would be settled, and therefore we won't see the possibility of price increase as a result of more adoption of such green design in the marketplace. So that's one area. Another difficulty is the availability of more accurate embodied carbon data and performance of those products. I'm sure CIC is addressing this issue, and same is Hong Kong Green Building Council. But for a developer like ourselves committed to a quantitative numbers in terms of reducing our SVT on embodied carbon, we don't just need a product with a certificate. We need a product with some quantitative numbers to inform us and put it into the whole equation in order to ascertain about the reduction in embodied carbon adoption. Because this is what science-based target being required on a really scientific basis and so on. So that therefore, this type of carbon data and performance data not yet mature enough in the marketplace is also deterring how much extensive we can commit to this type of ambitious target. In addressing this, we continue to work with university. Untitled Place, we work with Hong Kong UST to come up with a 575 kilogram carbon dioxide per square meter CFA. Again, for our stocks in China's mainland, one of our major development being put up in Beijing, we impose a similar kinds of requirement to the same project for this project, and we engaging Tsinghua University to build a carbon footprint calculation for us based on Chinese materials resources locally there, and we will be making use of the tool to ascertain about the embodied carbon and so on. So I think the industry need to really continue to equip ourselves more with this availability of data to help us to really gauge the overall performances and landscape. And wood materials, yes, I think we are interested. Particularly, we are trying to explore in a less demanding structural application. For example, not so tall building. I know a timber building now can actually build up as tall as 20 stories, but we still have to, I suspect, go through a lot of local restriction, both in terms of structural code as well as a fire safety requirement. But if it is of slightly shallower, then the requirement might not be as much. So we are keeping an open mind in ascertaining this type of low carbon materials such as wood for the major structure of our building, but it on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Raymond. I think because we are running out of time, we might not answer all the questions. But I wish your ambitious target will meet it. Yeah, because it's very challenging, especially in Hong Kong. Yeah, in Hong Kong environment.
It is very challenging.
Yeah, so very challenging in Hong Kong environment.
Our target 2030 is paving way to net zero future. We're still ascertaining the real commitment or real effort strategy requires to do so in achieving a net zero future. Let's work together in achieving it.
Science-based target is so scientific, so it's very challenging. You cannot just camp. Yeah, okay. Yeah, wishing you all success. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you.
Thank you.